Thomas was a man who could be called a role model. He had achieved a lot in his life. He had built a successful business, created an empire that brought profit and respect. But for all this, one detail stayed the most important to him: his son, Roman. Unlike many of his acquaintances, nothing was more important to Thomas than family ties. He was raising a son who had been visually impaired since birth. Roman, despite his disability, was for him not just a child, but the meaning of his life. Thomas spared no effort and time to give him everything he could: love, protection, care, and education. From the first days of Roman's life, Thomas took responsibility for his upbringing, decided that the boy should not feel left out. He hired the best specialists, teaching his son all kinds of skills so that he could adapt in a world that was not meant for people with disabilities. Roman was no ordinary blind child who needed constant help. He was smart, inquisitive, and Thomas was proud of his every accomplishment. But over the years, something began to change. Roman's actions, his reactions, his behavior, it all became a little strange. Thomas couldn't quite put his finger on exactly what it was that was alarming him. He continued to be such a caring father, but more and more often he noticed that his son was beginning to show strange abilities. He could walk through the house unassisted, as if he knew where everything was. Once, standing at the table, Roman suddenly picked up a book he had long wanted to read and began to flip through it as if he could see the pages. But the most amazing thing happened recently when he drew a picture. He drew it as if he could see all the details. It didn't settle in Thomas's mind. Roman had been blind since birth. How could his son draw? How could he read? It was impossible. "Roman," Thomas said quietly, sitting down beside him that evening. The boy sat at the table, his fingers touching the page of an open book. "You really can't, see? Are you still blind?" Roman looked confused. He didn't answer right away, but then, feeling his father's gaze, he spoke carefully. I'm just learning. I know how to do this, and I'm trying to figure out how to read and draw. But Father, it's not what you think." Thomas felt a cold uneasiness encompassed him. His son, the one he loved more than anything in the world, was saying such strange things. Still, Thomas couldn't believe that Roman could be anything more than he'd realized. "I always believed that you were blind, Roman," Thomas said, his voice soft but with worry in it. "You've never shown me that before." Roman was silent. His face was serious, and his eyes were thoughtful, as if he were trying to figure out what he should say. Thomas felt that there was something important here that he needed to unravel in order to understand what was going on with his son. He began to realize that there was a mystery hidden in his child's life that he could not solve. "Why didn't you ever tell me about this, Roman?" Thomas asked, trying not to sound accusatory. "Why did you hide the fact that you could see?" Roman raised his eyes to his father, and there was something strange in his gaze. It was a mixture of regret and determination. "I didn't want to upset you," he said quietly. "You've always done everything for me so that I could live like everyone else. I didn't want you to think I was capable of seeing and hiding it. I thought you'd be disappointed if you knew the truth. I didn't want you to feel sorry for me." Those words shocked Thomas. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His son knew he could see, but had kept his ability hidden from him all this time. He had always seen him blind, but now it wasn't like before. "Have you been able to see all this time?" Thomas asked, trying to figure out what was going on. "And why didn't you tell me about it? I always thought you needed my help." Roman, without taking his eyes off his father, spoke again. "I didn't want you to feel that I was different. I wanted to be your son, the way you saw me. I thought that if I told you, you would leave me or be disappointed." Thomas sat in silence, not knowing what to say. He looked at his son, who had always been his pride, and now a whole new man was revealed before him. Roman's blindness wasn't just a physical condition, it was part of how Thomas perceived his son. Now that whole picture was crumbling, and mixed feelings raged in Thomas's soul. "Roman," he said at last, "I don't know what to do about this. You should have told me. You shouldn't have kept the truth from me. I'm your father, and you don't have to hide what's going on in your life from me. We have to be honest with each other." Roman remained silent. His face remained calm, but Thomas noticed how hard it was for him to admit his guilt. The boy had tried to keep his worries to himself, but now he could see how worried his father was about him. He knew that maybe a lot would change from this conversation, but he also knew that you can't hide anything from the person who loves you. "I know you love me," Roman finally said, "but I didn't know how to explain it to you. I was afraid of losing your trust." Thomas felt his heart squeeze. He had always thought that his son could not deceive, that his love was so pure and sincere. But now he had a secret in front of him that called into question everything he thought about his son. With these thoughts, Thomas decided that he needed to understand more about what was going on. This unexpected truth he was facing was something he had to deal with. He knew one thing: he could no longer remain in ignorance. The day after Roman's revelation, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Everything he'd learned about his son didn't fit in his head. How could it be that Roman, who had been blind since birth, could read, draw, and move around the house without needing anyone's help? He tried to find an explanation for everything that was happening, but nothing came to mind. All these years, he was sure that his son needed his support, that he didn't see the world the same way as everyone else. And now that picture was crumbling. Roman was silent, his eyes still avoiding meeting his father's gaze. Thomas tried to understand what was going on, but his son's words, his doubts, kept him on edge. He couldn't just believe that Roman was hiding his ability to see. What if he'd been deceiving him all this time? Why hadn't he told him about his sight right away? And what did it all mean now? Maybe he was in danger all along, Thomas thought as he sat in his office. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't he tell me? There have been too many changes in his life in recent weeks, and these events only added to his anxiety. Business was getting more difficult by the day, competitors were keeping him busy, and problems with his subsidiaries threatened his financial stability. Thomas had already thought several times that this crisis would require him to make life-changing decisions. But now that he was confronted with Roman's secret, it all seemed less important. Far from all his efforts were focused on business. His son came to the forefront. He decided to talk to him. That evening, when Roman was sitting by the window again, Thomas approached him and, without waiting for an answer, began the conversation. "Roman, I need to understand everything. We can't continue to live in ignorance. You always say you don't see, but you don't. Why didn't you tell me?" Roman slowly turned to his father, his gaze heavy. He couldn't look into Thomas's eyes. He was silent at first, but then, with a heavy sigh, he spoke. "I didn't want you to see me differently. I didn't want you to think I became a different person. You always thought I was weak, thought I needed your help. I didn't want to disappoint you." Thomas felt his heart clenched. He was ready to hear a lot of things, but this truth was too heavy for him. He had always thought of his son as someone who needed support, and he was proud of that. He had accepted his role in Roman's life as that of protector and mentor, and now he was facing the reality that it was all just part of the image Roman had created for him. But why? Why was he hiding his true self from him? "Do you think I'm going to disappoint you?" Thomas asked, trying to understand his son's motives. "Don't you realize how proud I was of you? I've been your supportive father since you were born. You could have told me everything. Why didn't you trust me with your truth?" Roman stood up slowly, as if unsure of what to make of this conversation. He walked to the window, his figure seeming small and fragile in this huge house. "I didn't know how to say this," he said, his voice low. "I thought that if you knew the truth, you would change your attitude towards me. I wanted to be your son, not another person you saw me as." Thomas felt something inside him break. He had never considered that Roman might have felt fear of him. He'd thought his son was someone who couldn't deceive, who would always be there for him despite his weakness. But now that the truth was starting to come out, he realized that this truth was much more complicated. He didn't know how to go on. "Roman, you were and still are my son," Thomas said, his voice soft but full of anxiety. "I was proud of you. I was always there for you. But why didn't you tell me what you could see?" Roman turned and looked at his father. There was no fear in his eyes, only deep regret. "I was afraid you wouldn't understand," he said, "that you'd think I was a liar, that you'd feel sorry for me. I didn't want you to see me as someone else." Thomas felt how hard it was for him to realize all this truth. He was silent for a long time, trying to gather his thoughts in his head. And then, after a few minutes of silence, he decided to say what tormented him the most. "Roman, you shouldn't have kept this from me. But I have to understand why. I have to figure it out. If you want me to trust you, you have to be honest with me. We can't live secretly." Roman lowered his head, and his shoulders hunched slightly. He knew his father was right, but it was still scary to look into his eyes because he was afraid things would change. And Thomas knew that this moment could be a pivotal one for their relationship. He had to choose how to get ahead, but he also knew that their lives would never be the same again. In that moment, Thomas felt that his entire existence, all those years of living with Roman, had changed, and all he had to do now was to figure out exactly what all those hidden feelings, fears, and unspoken words meant. This truth turned not only his feeling of his son upside down, but his whole world. After Roman's revelations, which had so shaken Thomas, there was a period of silence. Father and son began to avoid talking. Thomas didn't know how to react to this situation, how to make a decision when his own life seemed threatened. Roman continued to hide his truth, and his every move, every word, seemed to be part of some carefully concealed plot. Thomas couldn't understand what to make of the fact that his son had deceived him for 20 years, despite all his love and care. The quiet evenings in their home began to resemble shadows, ineffable and indistinct. Thomas sat at his desk, drowning in papers, trying to sort out his own feelings. He knew he had to deal with this issue, but how? How to deal with what he was feeling? When did his son, whom he had loved and raised, hide such an important detail of his life? Why hadn't he told him the truth? Why was it now, when things were beginning to seem stable, that this secret was coming out? One morning, when Thomas returned home from business meetings, he noticed that Roman was already sitting at the table with a book in his hands. It was so unusual that Thomas at once felt an inner unease. Roman seemed preoccupied with something important, and his calmness made his father uneasy. There was something strange about the way his son was acting now, as if he no longer needed his help. "Roman," Thomas began, approaching the table. His voice was a little strained, but he tried to still be calm. "We need to talk." Roman raised his eyes and met his gaze. He didn't look scared, but there was a shadow of hidden pain in his eyes that was clearly preventing him from being open with his father. "I know you want to talk about this again," Roman said, his voice soft but tinged with weariness. "You said, I can't explain it to you the way you want me to, but you have to understand that I didn't want to hide the truth. I was afraid of losing your trust. I was afraid that if you knew I was no longer blind, you would begin to see me differently." Thomas felt his heart clenched. He could see that Roman was genuinely worried, but something in his words made him uneasy. He continued to listen, trying to figure out what was behind the silence. "Bolifoit, you've always been my guardian," Roman continued, shaking his head. "You protected me, took care of me, and I couldn't afford to ruin that picture because I didn't want you to think I was weak. You were so proud of me, and I didn't want you to see that I wasn't really what you perceived me to be." Thomas was silent, processing his son's words. He was confused. Everything Roman had said confirmed his fears, but at the same time it was vague. 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 He couldn't understand why his son hadn't told him about his restored sight. Why had he chosen this path of silence? "But you shouldn't have kept it from me, Roman," Thomas said at last. His voice was firmer, but there was still a note of worry in it. "You knew I was always there for you. I would never have judged you for what you could see." Roman shifted his shoulders as if a heavy burden was once again weighing on his soul. He opened the book that lay in his lap and began to read a few lines aloud, but his voice was hoarse, as if he himself couldn't find the words to express what he was hiding inside. There was something in his tone that made Thomas think that not everything here was so simple. "When I regained my sight, I felt the world had changed. But I wasn't ready to see you as you are," Roman continued, taking a break from the book. "You've always been my hero, and I didn't want you to see me differently. I didn't want you to feel like I was anything other than just your son." Thomas stood up and walked to the window. Everything around him, even his own home, seemed to be a foreign reality to him. He could feel this conversation becoming more and more difficult, and with each word, his confidence began to wane. This boy he had raised, who had been his pride, was turning out to be not the man he knew. And in his eyes, in his words, Thomas sensed not only doubt, but fear. "Roman," Thomas said, trying to speak softly, "I want you to know one thing. I will never be disappointed with you. It doesn't matter whether you see it or not. You are my son, and I will be there for you. But you have to understand that I can't live in this ignorance. You have to be honest with me. I want to know the truth." Roman was silent, and in his silence Thomas heard not only a painful confession, but regret. He felt that this conversation was only the beginning of what they must go through. They were facing not only questions about their eyesight, but also questions about trust, about how to go ahead with their relationship. Roman finally lifted his head and looked at Thomas. There was no fear in his eyes now, only confidence. "I won't keep it from you anymore," Roman said, and his words were a relief to Thomas. "I promise you that I won't hide anything else. But I ask you to understand that it wasn't because I didn't trust you. I just didn't know how to say it all." Thomas sighed, and walking over to his son, put a hand on his shoulder. "I understand, Roman, and I'll be there for you. Don't worry." That moment was a turning point for them. Thomas realized that now that all the cards were laid out on the table, they had a new path to travel. And while that path was full of unknowns, Thomas was willing to do whatever it took to regain full trust and build a new relationship with his son, starting with honesty. After Thomas and Roman had their frank talk, there was silence. It was a strange silence, not because of awkwardness, but because they both realized everything that had happened so far was just a preparation for the next step. They both knew that their relationship would change. But how? Thomas, despite his confidence and determination, didn't know what would happen next. He felt that the gap between them, though minimal, still existed, like some invisible wall. All Thomas wanted was to regain their trust and make their relationship honest and open. He no longer wanted to hide his feelings and thoughts from his son, as he had until now, and even more so, he didn't want their relationship to depend on deception, even if well-intentioned. But it wasn't that simple. The affair began to change before his eyes. He wasn't the same boy Thomas had known him to be. He became more independent, his behavior became more confident, and that confidence was not just in his words, but in his actions. He didn't rely on his father the way he used to. He didn't call out to him every time he needed help, didn't need support in the things that he had previously depended on Thomas for. It was obvious that Roman wasn't just hiding his powers, he was changing, becoming his own man. Roman now got up first thing every morning, made his own breakfast and worked on his books as if he hadn't been blind all along. He stopped relying on Thomas as his protector, as the one who saved him from the world. He began to search for answers on his own, to decide for himself what he needed. It was both amazing and frightening to Thomas. He couldn't understand what had caused this change. It wasn't easy being the father of such a son, who now not only didn't need his help, but seemed to understand on his own how the world his father lived in, and the world he didn't. One day, Thomas re-entered the study where Roman was reading a book, sitting on the couch as always. The book was difficult, philosophical, and the boy was obviously absorbed in it, immersed in thought. "Roman," Thomas began, approaching him, "I want you to know I didn't expect this from you. You surprised me. But at the same time, I want you to know that I can't go on without your help. You've become not only a son to me, but a mystery, and I need to figure out what's going on." Roman didn't answer right away. He put the book aside, twirled it in his hands, and finally said, "You've misunderstood something, Father. I haven't changed, I've just become what I've always been. You told me that I could be whoever I wanted to be, that I could live like everyone else. I just didn't want you to see me weak." Thomas sat down next to him, trying to understand his words. It really was all so hard to take in. Roman wasn't who he seemed to be, but somehow now his words, his actions made sense. They went against the way Thomas had built his life, but he still felt that it was now, after all these conversations, that they could really find common ground. "I understand that you want to be independent," Thomas said, looking into his son's eyes. "But you must understand one thing. I will never stop being your father, and whatever you do, I will be there to support you, not because I have decided for you, but because I want you to know that you can rely on me. That's not weakness, Roman. It's support." Roman looked at him, and his gaze grew a little softer. "I get it, Father," he said, putting the book down on the table. "I'm not hiding anything more from you, and I'm no longer afraid of what you might think of me. I trust you, but I also want you to trust me. We can't build a relationship on fear, on being someone we're not." Thomas felt his heart filled with pride. It was the moment he realized that their relationship with his son would no longer be the same. But it wasn't scary. It was normal. He knew now that they could be equals, not because he was a strong and wise father, but because he and Roman could move forward together, learn from each other. "I don't want you to be afraid," Thomas said, standing up and walking to the window. "I want you to know that what you've done for me isn't just help. It's a way to realize that you're a part of me, and we're in the same boat. We're a team." Roman stood up, walked over to his father, and put his hand on his shoulder. His face glowed with determination and calm. "I'll always be there for you, Father, and I'll do my best to be someone you're proud of. But now I realize that you can be proud of me too, not for being blind, but for being human, for being able to be honest with you." Thomas put his arms around him. In that moment he realized that their lives would be different now. He couldn't change the past, couldn't bring back the years when they had lived in the shadow of delusion. But now he knew their relationship could be even stronger because they had found in each other the strength to be honest. And it wasn't just a release, but a new path they would take together. After Roman and Thomas exchanged words and discussed their feelings openly, there was silence in their home, but it wasn't the heavy silence that had been in the air before. There were no barriers between them now. Though each of them was absorbed in their own thoughts, they knew that their relationship had changed forever. The walls that had been built between them for years had crumbled. And now, though there were still long conversations and questions ahead of them, they were beginning a new phase. With each passing day, Thomas could feel his view of Roman changing. He no longer saw him as a boy who needed protection. He saw a man who could and should be on his own. The Roman he had known all his life was now part of his past, and now he and his son had to learn to live in a new reality. At first, Thomas still couldn't shake off his anxiety. He worried about how he would perceive this new image of Roman, his independence, his desire to be independent. He thought long and hard about how his son would be able to live in a world that had long since become alien to him. But each day spent with him brought new revelations. Roman was not just the kind of man who, despite his blindness, was searching for his way in life. He was smart, determined, and knew what he was doing. Now Thomas saw it not only in his words, but in his actions as well. One morning when Thomas returned home after business meetings, he noticed Roman sitting on the veranda doing something. He came closer and saw his son marking out some diagrams on paper, drawing a concept for a new project. It wasn't just a random idea, it was a project, something he could do in the future. Thomas couldn't help but notice how his son had changed over the weeks. "Roman," he said, stepping closer, "is this your project?" Roman looked up and smiled. "Yes, father," he said calmly. "I thought I would pursue it. I want to start on my own path, create something of my own." Thomas felt pride overwhelmed him. He could see how confident Roman was in his decision. Everything that had seemed impossible before now looked like his son was ready for real life, for real responsibility. "That sounds great," Thomas said, sitting down next to him. "I'll support you, Roman, if you decide to move forward. You could always count on me." Roman looked at him, and there was something hard in his eyes, something Thomas had never noticed before. It wasn't just gratitude, but the confidence he now brought to their relationship. "I want you to know that everything I do myself." "But you're still an important person to me," Roman said. "I don't want you to feel superfluous." Thomas felt a slight shiver in his chest. He could see that Roman had become a mature man who was ready for life, and he himself was ready to put his sense of control behind him and open up to allowing his son to be independent. "Roman, you are not an extra. You are my son, and you will always be a part of my life," Thomas said. He didn't know why that sounded so important to him. Maybe because he had finally agreed that a relationship with his son could be as much about protection as it was about support. Maybe because he himself had also learned to let go, to stop being the one who always decided for the other. Day after day, Thomas watched Roman open up more and more as he gained confidence. His project became more and more complex, and his son began to really work on it, studying materials, searching for information. He began to understand how the world outside the four walls worked, and Thomas supported him in this, but never tried to impose his opinion. However, the changes in Roman's life were not limited to work. There was a new side to his life, and Thomas couldn't help but notice how often Roman began to socialize with people, how he built his relationships with those around him. He started attending different events, meeting people he had previously hesitated to socialize with. He was more open than he had ever been, and Thomas realized that his son had experienced not only an inner liberation, but also a willingness to open up to the world. But the most important thing that happened in those weeks was that he and Roman began to build their relationship on a foundation of respect and equality. They were no longer just father and son in need of protection and help. They became partners who could understand each other, support each other in difficult moments, and accept each other for who they were. At dinner that night, Roman said, "Father, I'm glad things have changed. I'm glad we were able to find common ground. I will strive to be the best, and you will always be my example." Thomas looked at him with a smile and said, "I have always been proud of you, Roman, and I will always be proud of you for becoming the man you are." That was the moment Thomas realized that their new life was just beginning. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. Now they were both ready to walk this path together.